Hello. Welcome to the Xirtus.
Synctank.
So there's clearly a war going on between, I'm not even talking about NATO. I'm just saying like between Echo and SSI, right? I think we're all experiencing that all the time. I'm gonna have max headroom moments and glitches just because I'm bringing this up. That's how it goes for me. But I'm super stoked because Chris is here. Good to have you back, Christopher Knowles from the Secret Sun. Hi.
Thank you, sir. Great to be here. Thank you for the invite.
I mean, you were toying with this already happening months ago, I feel like, because you've been bringing this up on your own. This is a subject that you're interested in as well. So that's really exciting. We're going to be talking about Earth Coincidence Control Office, solid state intelligence, and yeah, maybe you want to talk about what got you, and John C. Lilly, what got you interested in this in general?
It's just something I kept coming across in all my various journeys, especially back in the 90s. All this kind of stuff was popping up in, I don't know, Mondo 2000 or something. There was this whole movement with like the cyberpunk sort of moving into what was called New Edge. And New Edge was kind of like bringing in a lot of these sort of new age ideas from the 70s into the whole cyberpunk reality. It was very short-lived, but I was excited by it. So, and John Lilly is just something that always popped up. And plus, I'm a huge fan of Altered States. It's one of my favorite books of all time. And I love the movie too, even though a lot of people don't. I love the book. I was obsessed by the book, actually. And I read that, gosh, probably before most of you were even born. So it just had a huge, huge impact on me. And that's something that, later inspired me to dig more deeply into it as well. I mean, Lilly was nuts. Let's not let's not beat around the bush. He got a little too high on his own supply, but that doesn't mean he was wrong, So
would William Gibson apply in terms of like cyberpunk? Is that maybe, I don't know, is that like a precursor to cyberpunk or something?
I mean, it's literally the name of the computer.
Oh, there's Max Headroom again. Gibson is definitely one of the earliest cyberpunks. I mean, so, we're talking about Lilly, and that sort of ties in at least a tangential way with Philip K. Dick, which is another one of my huge obsessions. I was totally into cyberpunk back in the day. But I'll tell you what got me into cyberpunk, and this is like, I'm almost embarrassed to admit this, is that in 1987, they published this big square-bound 20th anniversary of Rolling Stone. And there was an interview with Timothy Leary in it. And he was talking about cyberpunk and everything. And it was kind of vaguely familiar with it, but that's what really got me into it. Plus I was getting into computers and so on at work in the late 80s. I got my first Mac 2CI actually. No, it's a 2SI. I think in 1990 or so, it was like $5,000. You know what I mean? And it had a fraction of the computing power of like a phone. So I was really, really huge into cyberpunk. But there was, interestingly enough, I mean, this is something I've written about as well, is that Gibson was sort of toying around with a lot of sort of metaphysics in his cyberpunk. You had people like Bruce Sterling who were a little more hardcore, a little more nuts and bolts. But I think there was definitely, he was definitely doing a lot of the work that the Wachowskis just ripped off wholesale for the Matrix. I mean, even the term the Matrix comes from Gibson. The term cyberspace comes from Gibson.
Does that mean like womb or something? Is it etymologically Matrix?
Yeah. I mean, that's
Related?
mother.
Okay.
Meter, I mean, all those kind of variations. It all has the same root word. But he's the one who really coined that term. And he, his version of cyberspace really inspired like all these people to just lose billions of dollars on virtual reality because, it was so inspiring. But, interestingly enough, it's almost full circle because now we have people like Thiel and Musk sort of at the head of the pyramid now. And these are guys who cut their teeth on that stuff, just as I did.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really exciting because it was a point in time where, I mean, punk to me had been dead for years, and there was nothing really exciting to sort of come in and replace it. And since, like I said, I started working on computers and very, very primitive stuff on modems and the internet in like the late 80s and everything, I just kind of felt like really tapped into it.
The idea of punk is very much like no boundaries, right? Like I just oversimplifying here, but like the original PR campaigns for what the internet was going to be was so tied with psychedelics and like that idea of going from the hippie to the yuppie and whatever was in between. Like, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely.
And so to draw these lines that originally were, non-existent, it's like we did with the internet the same thing we've done with our own terrestrial realm. Like we made all those same boundaries within it. And I think what you're pointing to, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like what Musk is doing is almost like hearkening back to what those original pioneers were who were selling us on the internet in the first place, being like, really, no, really, we can have no boundaries, and like there's that kind of maybe naive or maybe not like optimism of what potential exists here, and we want to get excited about that. It's almost like Obama's campaign, and then you're like, no, really though, we can have hope and change. It's like there's that carrot on a stick, perhaps, that we're just always chasing, of like wanting that lack of boundaries, which ties in with like punk and then what punk becomes. You know what I mean? Like it's like the end of SLC punk, as generic as that is, where he's like, I figured I could do a lot more change within the system than from outside the system. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you something. I started getting on the internet in 1993, like mid 1993, and it was the most exciting thing. I think it was probably the most exciting experience of my life.
Right.
And this is like AOL, 24 BPS, Usenet.
It's the wild west of cyberspace, man.
It was so exciting, and there were no rules, and it was all the early adopters, and you didn't have, low grade morons everywhere like you do today. But it was also fed by a lot of hype and a lot of corporate and military money. I mean, let's be frank about that. I mean, it wasn't like some, hippy dippy free for all. It was very much.
Most of the cool things do have some kind of military funding behind them, right? Unequivocally.
Including
Plus,
the hippies.
Even the Echo the Dolphin video game, you could argue, is military.
Oh gosh, yeah, gosh. My son played that, and then my wife got into it when Sega Genesis. I mean, that's really dating myself, but I think we still have the cartridge downstairs. Actually,
I played that game.
Well,
I have
again,
a good interview with Ed Annunziata, the creator of that game, because I had to wonder about how much he knew about Echo and SSI. And I find it interesting because even talking to him about time travel and how that affects, I don't know if you've ever beat the game or if your son beat the game, because most people didn't finish the game, I guess. But a few people did, like Michael Jackson. And basically he said anyone who's ever beat the game has reached out to him. as far as he can tell, which I think is
Oh.
hilarious. Yeah, including me. And so the point of the ending of the game is that the Vortex Queen, who's this villain, who's this solid state intelligence thing, is troublesome and coming back on these epochs, right? So there are epochs, and we know this because a whale knows this. There's this big whale that every 500 years is a storm. So he tells this dolphin, you got to go to the ruins of Atlantis because that's where the time machine is. And then you're going to go to the future. And once you get to the future, you'll be at the singularity. And at the singularity epoch, you're going to need to take the Vortex Queen back to before time, right? Not just before time, the before of time, right? And then you will integrate the Vortex Queen into
Whoa.
nature.
How
And when you
gen-
integrate her, sorry, yeah, very Genesis, you're right. Yeah.
Right.
It is. But you'll integrate the Vortex Queen into nature. So Echo the Dolphin takes this Vortex Queen and it becomes the Neoplatonic concepts that make up geology before life happens so that there's no war in the future, which is a crazy idea for a Sega Genesis game, right? But maybe there's more to it.
Fantastic. It's great. And I love the music too. Well, what you're describing really is kind of where my thinking has been for a while, because I sort of see, all this stuff that we do now, all this technology is kind of like an alien invasion. And I think ultimately it will be absorbed. It will be assimilated, let's just say. I think that since it is from somewhere else, ultimately, I mean, I really do believe that. I wrote a whole huge series on that. I think it will be brought into the fold. And I think that's how natural systems work. I mean, if you observe natural systems, alien influences and invaders and species and everything sort of come into the ecosystem, no pun intended, and are, might be an irritant or so on and so forth, but they're ultimately absorbed and ultimately assimilated. And I think that's, part of the process now. And I think that process is accelerating, but I think that, the ride's going to get pretty bumpy in between now and then.
It's been a while. What was the connection with Lily and dolphins and ketamine or something? What was the deal? I can't.
Well, yeah, he was. Well, to be frank, he was doing a lot of work for MK Ultra, and he was doing work with. I mean, it ultimately was like they wanted to train dolphins for sabotage, like naval sabotage, and so on. And so
Oh
forth.
shit!
And
Yeah,
that shows up. That
sabotage
shows up in a
dolphin.
William Gibson story, by the way. That shows up in.
Neuromancer?
No. It's one of
No.
his short stories. I forget. I think
It's
The
in
Arena.
Burning Chrome, which is the
Yeah,
collection of his short stories.
Exactly, Burning Chrome. Thank you. There is one of Lily's dolphins, so instead of in that.
Dude,
So that was the whole impetus behind it. It wasn't like peace and love and happiness and rainbow people. It was like, let's train these dolphins to bomb ships.
okay, you realize, okay, so I'm sorry to go there, but I have to. So like when
Don't do it. Don't do it.
when Sharon Tate died, Polanski was quote unquote scouting locations at sea, which I didn't know was a thing. Like you could be out on a boat scouting locations for a film for Day of the Dolphin, which he was set to direct. Later on, it went to somebody else, but that whole premise of Day of the Dolphin is about having having the president assassinated by a dolphin with bombs or something. It's been a while, but like
It's been
to
a long
have
time.
the dolphin direct towards the ship to blow up the president, which is like a Manchurian Candidate with dolphins, which is like the epitome of MK Ultra is the Manchurian Candidate. So I'm just like, I don't know. I just what the hell?
Well, but there is a weird hippie aspect too. There is a rainbow child aspect, which is that after this, I mean, granted, the military, first thing that the military is going to ask, it's like the bare minimum. Can you blow something up for us? That's like that's the benchmark. After that, they're going to ask what else you can do for me. It's true. And so they're going to say, can you make a dolphin echolocate in the dream realm for Project Stargate? It's going to take a while before they get to that point, but that's something that eventually they do start to ask for with this program, right? And John C. Lilly was able to convince people, and this is also something in that movie you bring up, The Day of the Dolphin. They show this. They show the dolphin doing the alphabet. And they're saying A, B, C, D, right? This whole thing in order to convince people that dolphins can speak like humans, which is novel, but more, it's something that would change the Drake equation. Because the Drake equation is this thing that nerds use to decide whether or not we're anomalous as consciousness in the universe. And if there's two, that changes it from one, which is immediately a huge difference, which is a fundable difference, right? So how fundable is it? It's so fundable that they created a group called Echo, the Order of the Dolphin, which is no longer called that. It's now called SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence.
Shit.
But every single member started out with a little dolphin pin, right? So there's definitely something to that.
Well, those alien dolphins left the retarded dolphins back here like eons ago, and so that's an Upright Citizens Brigade bit where some people say the dolphins are smarter than humans, others say that they are more smarter, and still others say that they are more smarter-est. Sorry.
Before, I don't know if we're going to circle back to Burning Chrome, so I just have to point out anytime William Gibson Burning Chrome comes up that in one of those short stories, The Winter Market is probably the earliest reference to adrenochrome in any science fiction book at all. And they specifically talk about taking this other like cyberpunky drug that prevents the adrenaline from decomposing into adrenochrome, and then they say otherwise you'd go schizophrenic. So I think that's one of the very first. And does this mean William Gibson was also part of MK Ultra? Because not a lot of people knew about that specific part of it outside of maybe Aldous Huxley, but then he got his info from like pre-MK Ultra doctors.
What about Hunter S. Thompson? Hunter S. Thompson
Came way later, because Winter Market was written in 1982, and I think that that came out in the 70s.
So
Hunter S. Thompson,
72 or 73 or something, yeah.
So yeah, this predates it by at least 3 or 4 years.
Wait, which I'm confused.
The Winter Market by William Gibson his reference to adrenochrome predates Hunter S. Thompson's reference and William Gibson's
when did he publish that?
1982 is when the Winter Market.
I'm confused because you're saying that 10 years earlier was before 10 years.
No,
earlier?
not 10 years. It was like 3 or 4 years prior to Hunter S. Thompson's book, I think.
But I thought Hunter S. Thompson's book was written in the early 70s. No,
71.
71. Okay.
So
we're having a time slip here, folks.
Yeah, we're having a time slip.
Yeah, 9 years.
Which is completely
yeah.
Totally makes sense for this conversation too. But
Okay.
earlier, a couple weeks ago,
you're right. Yeah, the math was wrong.
brought
the
up-
dates were right.
we did bring up this movie that's kind of blowing my mind. You probably have seen Fantastic Planet. Most of you, maybe you've seen Gondahar, the other one. Have you seen Gondahar?
No.
So Gondahar freaks me out. I remember seeing this as a kid. Dude, this movie's a trip because it's made by the same René Laloux, right? And it's about how in the future this solid state intelligence is going to travel back in time to the beginning. It uses lines like that. It says like, in the past we are winning, and in the future they've already won. You know, it's all this paradoxical present and past tense stuff. But I remember it as a kid particularly well because of these freakish faced torsos, which I remember later in life from Tartaria research. This is a woodcut thing. And so there's just something about that really kind of, the fact that Echo the Dolphin, that they have to find the Atlantis time machine in order to deal with these anomalies. Maybe there's a sync there, maybe not.
Well, dude, there is a sync because another MK Ultra reference here is that Robert Gordon Wasson was also absolutely obsessed with those little dudes with like the faces in their torsos. He made that a topic of obsession for him.
So I think, yeah, I mean, and JP Morgan, let's like not forget that ties right into the people that have the money to finance these ideas.
You could almost state that without a Robert Gordon Wasson doing his work first, you might not even have a John C. Lilly to the extent that we had one. Like he kind of built the steps for him to you know, he ran so that he could walk. He walked so that John C. Lilly could run.
So all the children could fly? No.
Oh my God.
You guys remember that? Like, I'm sorry, getting political, but Hillary had that concert in 2016 that like only like it was like 80% empty or whatever, and the cameras couldn't show whatever, but it was Jay-Z and Beyonce, and no one showed up, and it was in New York. It was like, you know, I can't believe more people don't talk about this because it was the most cringe speech I've ever heard from a politician, but she said that. She said, what was it? Rosa Parks sat so Martin Luther King could walk, so Obama could run, so all the children could fly. And the way, like, her delivery, oh my God.
Don't talk about children, Hillary. We don't want to hear what you have to say about that.
Martin Luther King said, "Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred." So I don't know if that's but okay. So do you think that this makes some sense then, that we're not looking at, okay, let's start with what you think we're looking at. When we're talking about Echo versus SSI, is this a metaphor? Is this a literal framework? How do you feel about this sort of like war between the two sides? Like, is that real? Like Earth coincidence control
it's
versus
nature
solid-state
versus artifice. It's exactly what I was saying. It's like Echo is nature. Echo is, our biosphere, our environment, our planet, whatever you choose to call it. And SSI is this invasion from some other reality. I'm sort of given to the work that Carl Raschke has done on the ultra-terrestrials as an explanation for that. That there is some sort of non-terrestrial, non-dimensional, something from some other reality, basically, that seeks to insinuate itself and sort of feeds this information, and has fed this information to people for the past 150 years or so, on how to develop this technology that will allow them to sort of bring us into their reality. And this is something that I was writing about on the blog, like 15 years ago or so. So there's a lot of information. Of course, it's all debatable, but it's there. And it's just how I believe the things work. Synchronicity, Echo, synchromysticism, however you choose to frame it, I think that is a natural process of our reality. And this other stuff, the solid state stuff, is coming from this foreign reality, this alien reality. And like I said,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I mentioned that makes a lot of sense also from what John C. Lilly wrote, right? He was calling Echo sort of our guide, not our God, and that SSI wants to be our God, wants to be a God, not our friend, essentially.
Right, but that's a matter of vantage point, right? It's what, if you're taking the topical to have more significance than the body of the thing in itself, So like that's I have this recognition. I think we talked about it the last time that you were here, Chris, because it was like, this idea that the conflation of biology and technology I see as one of the most problematic things. And like when like living in California and talking to Silicon Valley people, it's one of my, if I was to pick one thing that irks me the most, it's that without skipping a beat, you'll be talking to somebody who knows a lot of technology, and they'll apply it to biological systems as though that was just a completely reasonable thing to do, while one is superficial and the other one is the thing in itself, is complex.
It's inherent.
Yeah. So that speaks to what when you're describing Echo, that's where my mind just goes with that, where it's like something that is in the degrees of emanation, the side that's more dense, people are treating as having more significance than the etheric, even though it's going from subtle to gross in the way that it comes into form. So it's all backwards,
Well, we're going to be forced into a situation where we're going to have to respond to this in some way. I'm always been a skeptic about the limits of technology, because I think the laws of physics are the big speed bump there. All right. I think a lot of this kind of cyborg and a lot of these kind of things, you got to deal with the blood-brain barrier. I'll tell you, and I just said this the other day, I don't think Neuralink is a thing. I think it's total vaporware.
Oh no, come on, man. That's how Donald Trump dodged that bullet, man. He's got the freaking Neuralink. He got the signal at a time.
He's Neo.
You get two.
No, but the interesting thing that I wanted to bring up is that I've been seeing a lot of this sort of these AI animations, like these fake trailers and everything. And there's just something that really gets under my skin, because it's like I keep watching these things. Like, this reminds me so much of dreams I had as a kid. I can't put my finger on it. It's this, and I'm starting to wonder: are we building like an external dream, and without even realizing it? Because this stuff is just vacuuming all our data up. all our thoughts, all our dreams, all our wishes, all our images. It's vacuuming everything that we are up, and it's sort of spinning it back out at us. But are we creating this collective dream? You know, that of course we have to be extraordinarily careful in marking out the parameters of that. But that's kind of the feeling I get.
That's another part of the question. So how sure are we that this outside of us thing, this extraterrestrial, I guess, thing, or SSI, how outside of us is it? Is it outside of us in space, or is it outside of our time? Is it maybe that this is something we're creating this other universe, or does it really feel like this is a primordial equivalence, another reality, like a parallel reality with different order of different values?
That's how I see it. That's how I see it. I don't know, but I can't speak for anyone else, but that's how I see it. That we're just dealing with something so wholly alien.
Like Dark City style, like a completely
No,
different
that's
organization.
even more
Or?
so. I mean, those are still biological entities that exist in three-dimensional space and time, right? I think we're talking about something that doesn't and isn't. Okay, I mean, we're talking about something that's just so far beyond our conceptions of the reality that we can't even wrap our heads around it. And all we can do is sort of interact with it or have it interact with us. And what that exactly entails, I don't know. I really don't know. But I think that as this influence becomes more powerful, I think, so just put it in Lily's terms, I think as the SSI influence becomes more powerful, the echo, there's going to be an equal and opposite reaction from echo, so to speak. And I think that's happening. You know?
I'm having a really trippy thought. You guys, I don't know if you saw Lars von Trier's The House That Jack Built, but
I love that movie. Yeah.
Okay, so there's that psychopath played by Matt Dillon, right? Am I saying? And he's looking at people having what would be natural expressions of reactions, like smiling, and he's trying to so he's looking in the mirror and he's trying to imitate their expressions. And I'm reminded of, like, you know, in Kabbalah, the way that they describe the klipo, they mirror tetragrammaton. So they're the husks that surround are the emanated flow. And so in the idea of something mimicking something else, I very much relate to like what technology is in a lot of ways. Like there is the natural order that exists in nature, and they're trying to contort to match that, but they can't really be that. So they're just, you know, they're suckling off of the emanated flow, trying to get a part of that, but they can't really, because they're in a sense separate. Like they're distinct, but they're so far removed from that they can't quite reach that place. And so it reminds me, like, we're all kind of like, because there anything alien to the emanated flow would be called qliphothic kabbalistically. And so one could argue that we're like organizing all of these systems to try and match what is the actual thing in itself. So I don't know, it's like we're all just like the whole thing is like psychopathic in that sense. So I don't know.
It's preying on our children too. I mean, that's the thing that really concerns me. And this is something I just keep talking about. And people who are digital natives, as they're called now, I mean, their brains just work completely different. And we're hearing more and more, whether it's Gen Z or Gen Alpha, that we're dealing with people who just can't operate in this world that we're familiar with.
Yeah.
And it's in large part because iPads and TikTok and all these kind of things have just completely rewired their neurology. And that's something that we're going to have a very, very serious time dealing with.
What am I
rewired, and we also haven't trained the children. So I'm seeing here in Germany, children, like, all be walking down the street. There'll be a school. Kids are outside playing in the mud, and it's part of like the school that they teach them how to play and make sure that they're playing, because that develops parts of your brain. And if you don't develop that part of the brain, it's as bad as rewiring it completely. Sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
Well, one of the scariest experiences that I had when I was at Disney, and towards the end, they were doing lots and lots of market research where they would just go into the park and just pluck families out and be like, "Hey, kid, you want to, be part of this new thing?" And there was a certain age group, and it was a book. I think there was a magazine that they would read, and then there was like an iPad next to it. And we were literally watching this happen over and over again, where the kids would walk up to the iPad, use it, swipe around, like do some stuff with it. And there's like between 5 and 6, the age group. And then they would go to the magazine, and I swear that like half of these kids would swipe the magazine cover, and they didn't realize it was a separate physical thing. And it was basically just to get the reaction, if they had a better visceral reaction to like the printed physical holding. And the answer was no. Like they actually preferred the digital, which kind of shocked a lot of people. But that was particularly scary, because that's kind of going what Chris is saying, that the brain is looking at it differently.
That just them being more familiar with what what they're accustomed to,
right? But it's the expectation that everything works like this one thing.
Yeah.
And now
I remember
ability to respond to physical reality is what you're describing.
But then see, because I was at the French airport de Gaulle, and I looked at a kid and I was laughing, and quietly I was like, haha, he's like trying to touch the picture there because he thinks he can make it move, and then it did respond because it was a giant touchscreen. So yeah,
you never know, right?
Let me tell you a story. So I want to tell you how I got on Timothy Leary's bad side. So I went to see him talk about virtual reality at the Learning Center in New York, and at this point in time, I was sort of at the tail end of my. It was 5 years into my cyberpunk obsession, and I was starting to get pretty skeptical about its promises and so on. So he's talking about all this stuff, and I kept just bringing up, like, I raised my hand, I'm like, excuse me, Dr. Leary, if people know how to hammer a nail in cyberspace, that doesn't mean they can hammer a nail in reality. It's two completely different, operations. And I just kept bringing this stuff up because it was just like, at that point in time, people were just selling like, oh, it's just around the corner. I mean, we're going to be all living in virtual reality by the year 2000, and we're going to do everything that we do is going to be done in virtual reality, which I knew at that point was nonsense. But I mean, sort of just, that's an extreme example, but it's like this whole example of like these digital digital navel gazers, these digital natives are having an impossible time in schools. Like, they just can't be educated. They can't read. They can't read. They have no attention spans. They just can't focus because they're just so used to those dopamine hits over and over again. And that's not the way the world works. You can't operate a world with people who can't change a tire, or can't boil an egg, or can't tell the time on an analog clock, or whatever, tie their own shoes, for Christ's sake. I mean, there's just so many different things that you have to know how to do that are just sort of basic human requirements. And from what I'm hearing, they can't do any of them. And it's like, I blame, well, first of all, I blame the parents for allowing this to happen. But second of all, it's these digital environments that they're so immersed in all day. And that sounds,
they're not taught how to think, they're taught what to think, right? So
they're not taught anything. I mean, it's almost like this completely.
They're indoctrinated, though. They're being taught. Like I'm using the same term for things that are different.
Who's holding Will back right now? Bill's got to say something. Bill
is a math teacher, and I'm just like, dude, the McLuhan side of this too is really applicable. Just the medium is the message. So. Bill.
Well, McLuhan noticed that children of television were different than children of print, that they attack things in different ways. And this was a big part of him kind of seeing that media drives epigenetic evolution, right? And that we've been drowning in media for the last 2,000 years and slowly but surely epigenetically choosing certain traits. And these students, my catchphrase now is, we have 21st century brains in 19th century classrooms using 20th century technology. There's just no balance. And the kids, when they walk into the room, they realize just how fractured and unbalanced everything is. I mean, you have an empty room with rows of desks. They pack 35 of them into these rooms now. There's no breathing room, right? Then they give them these laptops, right? But then they have these phones with the internet in their pocket. And you're trying to stand up in front of a room and talk about the Pythagorean theorem, which slows the brain down to a crawl, because anytime you're trying to strengthen the cognitive pathway, you're working on just a single sense. But these are brains that are just exploding on the associative pathway. So you have to find a way to engage them in the associative realm and then draw them into the cognitive pathway. And no one has figured out how to do that in education, because everything is, when students fail, and just like anything in life, we retreat into the past for a solution. And so all these teachers who retreated into authoritarianism or mothering, they completely missed the mark. There's just a complete revolution going on, but no one knows what to do. The beauty about teaching math is that you have actual objective numbers with the results that you have in creating environment for 21st century brains, which is something that I feel in 8 years I finally cracked. But yeah, it all centers around McLuhan and recognizing that the 20th century was pretty much dead in the 60s, right? The seeds of the 21st century had existed. The military had internet technology, in 68, 69. We talk about how all of us discovered the internet and what kind of mind-changing experience in that was. But they were
My grandfather was like, "Good for you, son." Yeah, exactly.
But think of how many people out there created a critical mass who had internet technology throughout the 70s and the 80s. Just how far advanced did those people get compared to the people around them? You talk to like Kubrick or Ronald Reagan in the 80s. Kubrick talked about how his Mac, well, not his Mac Pro, but whatever computer he was using, the fact that he had spreadsheets was such a competitive advantage in him designing his films. And Reagan talking about the computer networking that he had that gave him such a huge advantage in his campaign in the late 70s and the 80s.
Oh, come on. It was his wife's psychic, that really did that work. But yeah.
But right now we're just dealing with choices.
Roosevelt, technically, but
we're just dealing with choices and how to use this technology. McKenna was very blunt about it. He says, if you had something where people went into a room and sat in one place for 6 hours at one time, you would say that they were on a drug, but everyone calls it television, right? So these technologies work on our brains like chemicals. They're that potent because they speed us up or they slow us down so much. And we just don't know how to have this conversation, because I don't think people are ready to understand just how much power we have with these technologies. To bring it back just a little bit, was Valis the most punk rock novel written ever? I mean, that's 1977, right?
I love it.
Think about the boundaries he dissolved in that novel, and we still talk about it today. I think it's more prescient than Gibson, but I don't know Gibson that well, so I'll throw that out there.
Well, I've always seen Valis as, really elaborate David Bowie fanfic in some ways, right? Because I mean, the Valis film within the novel was based on Dick going to see The Man Who Fell to Earth, and it was just falling out of his head. Basically, it was so in tune with things that he was thinking about and writing about on his own. I hate to say this, but we are going to need at some point somebody to sort of put their foot down and say, okay, listen, we can't have an entire generation of people who are uneducable and can't function in industrialized society.
Well, you can, as long as they're isolated and you have another backup. You know what I mean? Like if you're mutating people as an experiment.
They're not, and we don't. I mean, we're talking about tens and hundreds of millions of people
right,
who, at this juncture, lack, the basic skills. And I just keep seeing this over and over again. And William could probably speak to this better than me, but I just keep seeing these teachers saying, none of them can read at the grade level, not even close. They can't sit still, they can't focus. And
it's the pure death of human instinct. Like everything that we've ever worked on for generation after generations, built into, selected our mates for, taught our children, died over. These things took thousands of generations, thousands of years, and we can literally destroy them in less than a single generation. It's amazing, really, how easy it is to destroy something that took so long to build.
Well, on the path we are on presently, that will happen within your lifetime. Within your lifetime, if this road that we're barreling down, if we don't get on the the exit off this road, I don't even know what to tell you. I mean, you can't, society, a complex, industrialized, technologically advanced society relies on not only a very high degree of intelligence, but a very high degree of aptitude, but also, a certain kind of work ethic that has vanished. I mean, you have to, and you hear this all the time. I mean, I understand what Zoomers are saying. It's like work-life balance, and they don't want to be slave to the jobs. And it's like, yeah, right on. I agree with you. But at some point in time, I mean, when you're a young person, you have to put in the hours. You have to make the sacrifices. You have to do all the things you don't want to do in order to develop the skill sets that you're going to need to succeed when you have to take the next step. And you can't do without that. We have kind of been floating along in some ways, right? I mean, I think we've been floating along, and we've been authoritarian in all the wrong ways in some ways. But it's like at some point, somebody's going to have to put their foot down and say, okay, listen, we need a hard reboot here. We need people who are going to, be able to fix the phone lines. We need people who are going to be able to fix your tires. I mean, we're going to need all these basic skills that are vanishing before our eyes, and we cannot live without them. And the answer is always, well, we'll just, we'll import more immigrants to do that work. Well, guess what? Birth rates across the entire world are collapsing. You know what I mean? And particularly in the areas, people don't realize what trouble you're in when, like, Korea and China, Thailand, Japan, all these countries that are basically the engine room, they're the workshops of industrialized society, their birth rates are just cratering. They're in well into negative birth rate territory. And it's like, these are the people for the past 50, 60, 70 years were building all the things that we take for granted. How are you going to replace that? You're not. And it's because it's very cultural. I will say that. It's like, it's all based in Confucianism in some ways, or Buddhism. I mean, all these Eastern philosophies that are very, let's just say, action oriented and practical minded. And if they're not there, we're screwed, guys. I'm sorry to say. It's just, something has to change. I don't know who's going to change it. I have no power to change it. None of us have any
automation.
Power to change it. What's the last book in the Pentateuch? Is it Deuteronomy? And they have Exodus. They've left Egypt, right? And they're wandering in the desert. And a whole generation has to wander in the desert before they enter the promised land. Am I accurate on that?
Well,
yeah, I think that's right. Deuteronomy.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's where we're at. The Exodus that we
That's a really good point.
The Exodus that we've made is of the 20th century. The 20th century was supposed to go on forever.
Right. The explanation of that 40 years in the desert is one of non-localization, that you want to bring that energetic to wherever it is that you settle, is this idea that you are not ultimately localized. Like, it's something that we do developmentally, and that's how the ego kind of establishes itself to, it's like kind of a coping thing to be like, where am I in time and space? Because when you're first born and you're not even, your eyesight's not developed and everything, you are just like non-localized consciousness, and then everything narrows down. Freud would argue, and people would take it much better and further than him, this idea that we take the energy, it's all one energy, so to speak, and then what could be going towards, what we would call, sublimation or whatever, what could be like cosmic, ultimately gets narrowed down to these centers. That's like either your medial brain and like the tip of your genitals, and then these are the focus points of like that but it's about that narrowing, and that we don't like the vulnerability that comes with not being localized is, that's a whole. So I wonder sometimes if, like, what you're describing, if, like, because you're saying if we don't do that, and I can consider that, and I look at it from that perspective, like, if we don't do these things, we're screwed. But at the same time, isn't there something to be said in terms of like evolution, how development happens, where we troubleshoot on like a primordial level, like we see how we're not developed, and then like that's what leads to the development. Like we
Except
develop
for
eyes.
things are so-
Who's we, David? I mean, who's we? You know, you say we. I mean, us here are such a small subset of a subset of a subset. We are not representative of the
Right,
mainstream
Mike,
at
like-
all. And the mainstream, listen, it's not encouraging. I mean,
what I'm speaking to is not something that we are actually going to do in the sense that we relate to doing things. That nature itself has its own kind of, you know,
except in this
prerogative.
circumstance. Here's
And
the
direct-
issue. This is why I don't want to, but I end up agreeing with Chris on this issue, especially on the idea of that SSI isn't just some manifestation of evolution, which is what I'd love as a child growing up in Silicon Valley. I would have loved that. You know what I mean? But I
Right,
don't think that's the
there's
case.
two-
I think
there's
it's actually,
directives.
I think it's that idea of the Oracle that you've got technology, radio, Kubrickians, you know, Kubrick leaving his synths on all the time so that spirits will just take over its body, right? This is the median prophecy that's opening beyond the veil to something that is not just parallel, but maybe antithesis of what we are. It might be the exact opposite of our value.
There's that idea about the value of ignorance that's kind of like that's hidden, that it's something, there's something explosive about us not knowing something and then it being revealed, and the intelligence that exists in nature that goes so far beyond what we think that we as a species need to do to make these things happen. Like it could be that our faults, like what are our actual missings of the mark, actually contribute to a deeper revelation that like assists in that transformation, like we, like, in other words, like you develop eyes out of a primordial desire to see, you develop ears out of a primordial desire to hear. This isn't desire as we generally relate to it, where we have a conception of what we want and then we take steps to reach that desire. Whereas like what the way that nature itself is, it's like through our own failings the actual organism can begin to learn what is needed. So one could make the argument that all of these missteps are actually contributing to that transformation ultimately, in the midst of like us reacting to those failings like, oh God, we're screwing up. Like it could be that all of this is actually contributing towards a higher end that we can't conceive of because we're like the dog looking at the human playing chess, you know what I mean? Like, or even
but in the
more of a
meantime,
chasm than that.
in the meantime, you need somebody to take the trash and keep the pipes and the electricity operational, and you know, build your cars and fix your cars. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I see those things in sort of the macro, but in the micro, in the mundane, in the everyday, is where we're in trouble. And that is a problem. Listen, you know, it's sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And it's like our hierarchy is like what you're talking about there, this goal, this evolutionary goal in consciousness and so on. And that's great, right? But you need all those steps, you know, in the little pyramid,
Totally,
to not collapse from underneath you.
Yeah, I'm just arguing more of a corollary than I am actually like an opposition.
Well,
like
I can unify all of these arguments in a way that Andreas will really love too. But and I don't mean to sound one note with this, but I'm hearing about buildings and foundations collapsing. I'm almost hearing about we're not teaching the 7 liberal arts anymore. You know, logic, grammar, rhetoric, and all the other, you know, the quadrivium. And that, David, you were basically saying that there almost needs to be an ignorance followed by a grand revelation, almost as like seeing value in this knowledge you're being. Are we just talking about Freemasonry via Mormonism and both of those just being proxies, the secret mystery schools kind of being the answer to what we're kind of describing, even at the micro level? If there were like a digital Freemasonic, that's exactly what I heard you say, almost verbatim, sir.
No, I feel like e-masonry and open sourcing e-masonry is a cute idea, but like it's still the Promethean. It's still the issue of the Promethean religion is a donkey bridge, right? It's a dangerous, heavy, load-bearing bridge that you can get one thing to another point. I think this is the funny and interesting thing about ethno-religions, right? You look at Judaism, for instance, and it creates from itself its goals, and then it proliferates itself. And you could call that at some point really a progressive and fast-paced evolution. But today you can't, because of the same thing that Chris mentioned, which is that this is not an isolated event. This is radio. This is Schumann resonance changing. This is everyone all over the world, all the time, getting it at once. And we don't just have the diversity of multiple crops of humans that are different. Having a nation of techno rats out of New Zealand might have been an isolated event. No, instead, this is everywhere, all at once, completely headed towards the destruction of the old without really having a solution yet, hoping that nature will do that. But nature usually takes a long time to come up with solutions that replace things.
Well,
and we're
nature
doing this so
doesn't
telescopically fast.
Nature doesn't necessarily give humanity preference either. Nature gives nature preference.
True. But again,
Right.
this is
And
so freaking fast. We could destroy all of nature too, you know?
Civilization is a very thin veneer, you know, over a savage world, basically. And it requires people, I mean, it asks of people to make certain sacrifices to keep the enterprise moving forward. And we all face that.
Oh
But
yeah.
the thing is that if we have people who don't face that or can't face that or don't have the tools necessary to make those sacrifices to keep this engine running, you know, to keep the wolves from the door, okay? If you any study of history, you're going to see very advanced civilizations collapsing and vanishing over and over again. And the problem is that with our footprint on this planet and with our technology, our destructive power, we can't afford to have that happen. We have to keep this enterprise moving. We have to keep, you know, the gas in the tank, all right, and the air in the tires, or otherwise, I can't even begin to conceive the kind of horrors that we'll face. And I know that sounds dramatic and apocalyptic and so on and so forth.
No, this
like,
is your life, you know. This is you just described the Golden Bough in a nutshell in a way, or at least the implications of the Golden Bough as it relates to us today and like our current anthropological movement. Like we need sacrifice, and our like leadership is basically gotten to the point that they are unwilling to make any sacrifice, and that hubris and that arrogance is like the downfall of all of us. We all have to deal with it. So it's like if we were just to say, like, look at American politics right now, it's like whatever it is that you think about who was elected president, if you want him to fail to prove some point, we all have to suffer with that. So if you want, like, it's that we're like at a precipice, and it seems like it's a perpetual precipice. Like, so that might seem contradictory, but it's like we're always at the edge, right? So it's like we're like, oh, it all comes down to this, but it's so cyclical, and it seems like the cycle is like narrowing down along with the rest of it. So I would like to see some transcendence happen out of that quickening, you know. But like,
we need visionaries is basically what it boils down. We can't go back. You know, you see this all the time in right-wing circles. It's like, well, let's just go back to this. And it's like, well, we went back to that, and this is where we ended up. We're just going to end up here again. You know, all you're doing is delaying the inevitable.
Make Rome great again, you know?
Yeah,
that's what Bill was saying too, that we reach into the past in order to figure out solutions to things that we haven't solved yet.
Well, I mean, I think there are examples for us to follow. I mean, you know, there are lessons for us, you know, because everything is cyclical. Everything's happened before to some extent. But we need visionaries. We need people with new ideas. We need people who can see further down the road than any of us can, and can say, well, this is, you know, and because that's going to inspire people. All right. People are not inspired. You know, this is like a television program in its 9th season. You know, it's like all the stories have been written. The cast and the crew are exhausted. You know, we're all tired of the same thing. It's like people are not inspired. People have no vision of the future at all. You know, and I know Musk is trying to talk about this Mars thing. It's like nobody's going to Mars ever. You know, we need people who are going to inspire us to take on these challenges and to make the sacrifices that we all need to make, particularly people, you know, who are going to be movers and shakers and so forth, to make those sacrifices. Because again, we are at the end of this road. We are at the end of this road, and the only way we move forward is people stepping forward who have a very powerful and inspiring vision of a future that isn't based on 1920s science fiction.
Are we somewhat describing MK Ultra in just a small way here, of like the movers and shakers that are willing to take risks and advance in ways that no one else wants to?
MK Ultra is just witchcraft, basically, in my estimation.
Ooh, interesting.
It was just standard issue witchcraft.
Isn't that kind of Peter Levinda's position on that too in Sinister Forces, as I recall? Like, it's just this idea of like he was looking at it like a political grimoire, and the way that he treats MK Ultra, I think, is very much in line with witchcraft. Isn't it weird that like Polanski films tended to go back and forth between CIA, MK Ultra, like Death and the Maiden, and witchcraft, MK
The
Ultra?
problem with MK, I don't know if it's a
Witchcraft, MK Ultra.
problem. I don't know if it's a problem with MK Ultra per se, but it's interesting coming out of like Bamberg witch trials in Germany into Nietzscheism, right? Because the idea of the ape and the Ubermensch or the Superman, I think, plays into Paperclip scientists' perspective on MK Ultra.
Mm-hmm.
They're thinking of it as that they're manifesting some sort of technotronic. You know, like Brezhnevinsky said, there will be sirens on cars that allow them to go through the lights that stop everyone else's vehicles, right? There'll be a class of people that just do what they're told.
But it's just a giant
They're
backfire.
automatons.
Like, what happened with MK Ultra? Isn't it just a massive backfiring where they're like, they have these kind of ambitions. They're very like naive.
Well, I think at the same time
At
the same time as MK Ultra is happening, so is this amazing technological marvel that we're talking about. Where
they're all interlinked, and they're all happening within like a 50 square mile radius. You know, from San Francisco or in Berkeley, you know, down to Palo Alto and so on and so forth. But you know, back to MK Ultra. I mean, it's like I always go back to what Owsley Stanley told Ken Kesey at one of the acid tests. He said, "This you're doing witchcraft. This has been known forever. This is nothing new. And if you really start to go back and read a lot of the materials, particularly some of the case studies and some of the reviews that other scientists were commenting on, you know, say what people like you and Cameron were doing, you know, he said there was no scientific basis. And I don't think there was ever any scientific basis. I think it was a witchcraft revival. And, you know, what did they call Sidney Gottlieb? They called him the Black Sorcerer. So
and the dirty trickster.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we don't know this stuff we didn't know this stuff. We do now because this material wasn't really circulated. But you know, you mentioned Wasson and the Road to Eleusis and all this work that all these people were doing, going down to, you know, South America, Central America, and studying, you know, the ancient mystery cults and so on and so forth. I mean, they knew what they were doing. It's just that, you know, the goals and the methodologies were just totally fucked. So that's basically what happened. That's how it all ended up.
It's weird though when we talk about witchcraft in this regard. Like, I see what's being pointed to, and I agree. And at the same time, from a technical place, wasn't a lot of the attack on witchcraft just an attack on natural medicine and also like?
No, that's myth. That is those stories were basically concocted in the 1970s by, you know, like Marion Ravensclaw or whatever these people.
Right. Okay.
If you go back.
Well, I'm not talking about Wicca.
No. What I'm saying is that if you go back and read some of the literature, witchcraft got really ugly. You know, I mean, listen, it was all sort of a survival of European paganism. You know, pagan religion, which was all about blood sacrifice.
Right, but I guess
you know, a lot of bad things, and there's a lot of mythology that sort of grew up around this. Like I said, basically from these people who are trying to sell Wicca in the 70s. But it really has no bearing on reality.
I got a question though. I got to say
there are midwife or
Oh, I wish you weren't glitching right now. This is what I wanted. This is the point I was trying to head towards.
There are women with their taking baths in blood.
Okay. Right.
Did I get shut down for saying that? Did I get shut down for saying that midwife? Okay.
You did. Yeah. I just want to point out, David, you were mentioning like the sort of apologists for witchcraft, like the modern version, like, oh, they were just being persecuted for being pagans in nature.
Yeah.
That actually dates at least back to 1862. This guy Jules Michelet wrote La Sorcerie, I believe, and that was the original claim. And then from there, a whole bunch of other people started tacking on to the point where you just get Wiccans are like, we just like patchouli.
Right. Okay. Well, there was, you know what? I'm taking this from different places. So there was an Always Record where we interviewed a guy who wrote a book called The Venus Blueprint, I believe, and it left an impression on me because basically what I've ultimately extrapolated, and I'm open to other ideas, like I'm not completely attached to this, but there's that notion that you know, because I see this in our own times where there'll be one thing happening and another thing is happening, and they'll get completely twisted together. Or they'll get like they get lumped in, and so like those arguments that are made for like the treatment of witchcraft, I have to wonder if like this is happening and this is also happening, and then they just give it a blanket term, and there's like people are opportunists. So it's just like you could say like a COVID, like you could make the argument that there was no virus, the whole thing was made up, it was a pandemic. Or you can make the argument that there is a virus, it happens to be a bit more contagious. What makes it novel, I don't know, but the response itself basically projected all kinds of things, and it was a lot of opportunism that was built into that. So I have to wonder, like when we're looking at history, is it not that dissimilar from what we have today, where it's like there's multiple things taking place at the same time, but we have this kind of blanket treatment towards all of it. So I thought there might be some beyond, like, you know, Wicca's ideas around rationalizing what witchcraft is and trying to kind of like, you know, give it this
I
other,
mean,
you know,
we say so often, like, I think it's true. In the 70s, there was a push to say, you know, witchcraft is really just women's studies, and I don't think that's
Right,
an accurate. I don't think that's an accurate presentation.
Not historically
what-
accurate.
no, I agree
if you
with
go
you.
if you go to the Smithsonian, and you look into the elite taking baths in the blood of innocents and
One
how
time.
not just one time, and again,
It's not
the idea,
anecdotal.
not anecdotal, and the idea that the Chinese celestial bureaucracy, you know, that anyone who was elite had to be elite by being able to interpret the laws of nature and to conquer them, that gets to a kind of weird place where you have to say, okay, there's a reason why there were probably wars with pitchforks, where everyone came up against these particular elite families who were practicing not just, you know, Wicca, like you're saying, right? That's not the
Well, there's a
the be-all,
derangement
end-all.
that was taking place with people in the wilderness and their religion. Like, I don't know how much truth is entirely within the crucible, but like that ties directly into McCarthyism, like where he was coming from when he wrote that. What's his name? I can't think right now. Who was with?
You know, but if you really want a better example of like what witchcraft was like, I mean, it's more like analogous to like Deliverance or the Blair Witch
Okay.
Project. You know what I mean? It wasn't clean and tidy and nice. It was blood sacrifice, and it got ugly.
Right, but
And-
there's also
and
people
drug-
flipping out on like just accusing people of being something because they were so caught up in they're getting carried away with religion in this way that it was just like their imaginations overtook them, and it was really easy. Like if you had a problem with your neighbor, you could just accuse them of practicing witchcraft,
Well,
which
again,
did exist also.
No. Let me just stop, because I interviewed this guy who wrote a book on this, and he went back and read all this literature that the witch, you know, the serious witch hunters wrote within the church. And first of all, they were extraordinarily skeptical about those kind of claims about, you know, people who just wanted to blame their neighbor or something, or people who are, you know, abusing. It just wasn't that way. You know, like I said, this is all the revisionism, the 20th century revisionism. I mean, I'm not, there was a lot of ugly periods, you know, like say during the English Civil War and so on. But it just, the mythology that there were just these witch hunters just running around willy-nilly, just grabbing women who were midwives and everything like that, is not based in reality. And it's the same thing that I say with, like, you know, when I hear people talk about the satanic panic. Okay, I actually did the research and I collected a lot of this information, and there were a lot of satanic crimes in the 70s and 80s. I mean, there were a lot of people who created, you know, who committed horrific crimes and said, I did it because I was offering the sacrifice up to Satan. I mean, there was a lot of this stuff, and it's all been overwritten. It's all disappeared. I mean, thank God I have a lot of this stuff on hard drives and so on and so forth. But there's a constant need to sort of create narratives, and there's this constant need to just say, like, everything old was bad and everything new is good, and vice versa.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So a lot of these kind of ideas that we hear about, like the witch hunts and so on and so forth, are really fed through this propaganda matrix where it's like we are trying to sort of create this new reality, and we're trying to flush away the old reality. So we just take all these things that are easy targets and just say, oh, like all these witch hunters were just misogynists and so on and so forth.
Right, right.
But it wasn't like that. I mean, yeah, you had examples like I said, during the English Civil War, and you had the examples like that during Salem and so on. I mean, there were certainly some pretty ugly periods in history. But, this guy went through it and he said, usually, like, the priests were just like, come on, don't bother us with this shit. You know what I'm saying? And it's the same thing with the Christian persecutions. Yeah, there were periods of extreme persecution against Christians. But most of the time, the Roman authorities are like, oh, God almighty, I don't want to deal with this stuff. If you want to die, just go kill yourself.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it was helpful. It was useful for Christian propagandists to say that it was just this free for all, and Christians were just getting thrown to the lions.
Right.
And, it's all propaganda.
But isn't this like, I have a hard enough time with the news today and figuring out what the hell is actually going on. So like when we say history is written by the women, I don't know what all the variables are. Just the other day, I was looking at explanation of the 1970s, all the you're referring to the Satanic Panic, but there were so many serial killings and like all this gnarly stuff. And then you can see it kind of like goes up, and then people were like arguing that it was like, well, there was, what were they talking about, metals or something in our environment, and that people were basically being deranged by these other influential.
Oh, that's true. Lead.
So, but then when I hear that, I immediately go to thinking about what's been said about this something that was postulated regarding Salem, that they were like, this was St. Anthony's fire, and that you had people who were getting ergot poisoning and then they're in the wilderness with their religion, like I was saying, and just going off the freaking deep end. And how many things are all of these happening all at once? And then what do I have to go on? But like, I can appreciate that you've done your research, like, and at the same time,
I was about to say, where was the official
narrative of today? How the hell am I going to trust the official narratives of that long ago? Like, I mean, I don't know ultimately, but I can see.
Well, okay, a couple things. Like, respect to Chris being from Massachusetts. I feel like that might play into his knowing about Salem, Massachusetts. Two, if you look at the British witch burnings and witch trials, etc., there's something like 500 people in the entire history of England, because they have them all written down for the most part, because these are courts, trials, right? So they have the names of the people. There are about 500 people in 4 or so centuries, and 90% of them do happen during the Civil War, which is like when everybody's getting killed, because there's no rights under a democracy and they have Cromwell. So there's a lot more going on that led to that, obviously. And you can see the one time where they're talking about midwives being kidnapped and whatever, that's King James doing it because he's a freaking witch. So I'm just saying, like, it ends up being still that it's the elite that are practicing the occult. It's historically been a thing. And like, if you're in charge and you're practicing magic, that's just doubly scary, because you're like, okay, maybe they're in charge because they're practicing magic, which is what they believe. That's their whole belief structure.
On that note, I'm actually curious what your guys' take is on like a rough theory that I've just bouncing around, not even my own, just like forgot the source of it. But that we were mentioning Rome. Well, Rome, one of their functions historically, my understanding was that they took a state religion of magic where everyone was doing, like in Carthage, I guess, Carthage and the rest of Phoenicia, that they were doing state endorsed magic, state mandated magic, all the sacrifices, everything, the large sex magic orgies. That these were not underground. It wasn't for just the elites. It was for the entire society.
It depends on how you look at it.
Snuff it out. And then Rome basically says this is only for the military. And then it goes from only the military to only the elites. And this almost feels like it's a net positive and net negative.
At the time, because the state wasn't the monopoly, these religions required taxation of your family. So instead of just conscripting your son to be a soldier, they would conscript your daughter to be a what do you call it?
Vestal.
In a temple where you lose your virginity.
Vestal
virgin for like until you're not.
Well, when you bring up the Carthaginians,
rituals for all of the daughters.
I'm sorry for interrupting. When you bring up the Carthaginians, you're dealing with mass scale child sacrifice. What they call the Tophits.
But could that be part of the downfall of modern society, is that has been all but eliminated aside from maybe like conscription and drafts?
what? It's the downfall of society that we don't practice child sacrifice anymore.
That's an argument to be made.
I would not make that argument. No,
I'm pretty sure they're still practicing child sacrifice anyway.
I was thinking the same thing. Sorry.
Yeah, well, listen, human sacrifice has been universal throughout every culture in the world. But there are certainly examples when look at the Aztecs. They became so over the top with human sacrifice that all their enemies basically collaborated with the Spanish to destroy them, because they would just go into some village, kill everybody, and then take the rest of them up to these pyramids and cut their hearts out. I mean, thousands of people a day. I mean, it was insane. So no, I don't think that the child sacrifice is a good thing for civilization or society. I think it's usually, if you really look at it, it's usually practiced under duress. It's usually when civilization societies become stressed, and that is, we've got to propitiate the gods with the blood of our children. So I would argue against that personally.
I'm glad you're so open-minded to think about it even. My God. All right, Bill, what do you think about child sacrifice? I'm almost kidding. You're a teacher.
Child sacrifice? There's reasons for it, I imagine.
All right, how about earlier you talked about the analog clock, and I was thinking of this related to binary and SSI. The line, that Moses's line kind of thing, yes or no, black or white, this or that, versus analog, which I think is a more organic and natural, how much of something is true, the range of truth. John C. Lilly talked about insanity and outsanity, right? How true something is and the limits of that truth. Do you think that there's something there with analog versus binary in terms of
100%? 100%. Like, why do kids take to screens so quickly? They're not repelled by them, right? They dive in. And so obviously there's some sympathetic thing going on where like attracts like, and they're just magnetized to it, right?
It's just the moth principle, yeah.
So there's something going on in the human brain that naturally responds to this flow of information, right? Whether or not it's appropriate for human beings at certain ages, that I think is the question, right? What is, like, we don't give a 6-year-old a car, and yet we put them on the internet. The brain is traveling at a much faster rate of speed. It's incorporating all this mysterious stuff that is bright and loud, and who knows what they're taking in, but it's a magnet. And so really, it really sucks to put this on parents, but the problem really is in parenting right now. It's that you're bringing something into the sanctity of your house and you're just letting it be. And you're not really responding to it. Televisions were brought into the house without any consideration about the impact it had. And who was the person who pretty much put television on the map?
Heather O'Rourke?
I mean, if I'm going to be technical, wouldn't it be Farnsworth and Crooks?
It would be Hitler. Right? Because Hitler had the Olympics in 1936 and he wheeled in televisions into the German villages. Like, what the fuck? Like, I mean, I don't care what anyone says, but if your leader wheeled in a box that was showing what was happening in the capital of your country in 1936, that's a big impact, right?
Right.
And then I go back to Rome, right? Where did the first newspapers originate out of? Rome, right? The daily news, the fact that life became this real-time narrative. When did those emerge? About 50 BC. When did we see Christianity emerge? About 80 years later, right? So you go from the news, this local linear bit-by-bit narrative, and then all of a sudden you have these gospels, the good news, the eternal news, the newspaper that isn't for every day to day. This is the news that represents all of time, right? What emerged in our society about 60, 70 years ago? The internet. right? Social media. Social media is considered a blight upon humanity right now, but it just, in my estimation, prevented a really terrible candidate from winning the presidency.
Well,
it doesn't look pretty on the surface, but I think all of us in our gut know Trump dodged a bullet, but the country dodged a bullet with whatever is masquerading as that candidacy.
well, yeah.
I
What it
put a
showed
lot
was
of
that we
trust.
don't want
Or, and I hate to be like but like maybe we were just hyper provoked into the most obvious choice with the stick and the carrot, the sugar bread and the whip, and they get you to like say, "Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Alliance, to we're a United States, we're a puppet state of Israel or NATO or whatever it is. We needed this war chief president, and Trump is." Not just like a violent war chief, he's a deal-making war chief, but we're all so grateful in a way I don't think we would have been if we had not had the context. Like, we've been led to the point of being grateful. Am I wrong? I feel like we would have not felt this way before.
I just want to back this up just a little bit, because I sort of want to focus on the things that I've been talking about. And I really believe that there is going to be a call for it, and I think there's a justification for it, that the use of children and computers needs to be controlled, needs to be regulated, needs to be handled other than just putting an iPad in front of a toddler and letting them fend for themselves. Because, what Bill's describing, I see it almost as like it's a limbic reaction. It's like, oh, something shiny and moving around and colorful. It's not even, there's no rationalization, there's no intellectualization going on. It's purely a limbic reaction. And the people who, create the software and create these technologies are very good at manipulating that. And that needs to be regulated. It has to change. I think we really need to limit the amount of screen time that kids have for real. I think we need to drastically limit the amount of time that kids spend playing video games. All these kind of things. I think we have to get back to introducing children to the physical world. All this stuff. I know you're a teacher. I don't want to blame teachers, but teachers.
You can blame teachers.
because the teachers all day long. Don't worry about it.
They didn't want to come down from the lockdowns because it was easier for them. They didn't have to They didn't have to be in physical proximity to these poorly behaved children.
Vectors.
They could just be, doing what we're doing here and just sort of manage it there and, sit in their pajamas and so on and never have to leave the house. That's not going to wash. Children have to be familiarized with the physical world. When I was a kid, I mean, I'm obviously Generation X, I'm older than you guys, but it's like I broke arms, legs, scars, poison ivy. I mean, I got a crash course in the physical world and the dangers of it as well. And if we don't get back to a balance between the digital world, the imaginal world, let's just say, and reality, the physical world, we're doomed. Again, I don't want to keep harping on this, but it's like we're going to need to just stop and say, all right, live and let live is great. We all want to just be cool and libertarian about everything and so on and so forth. But that doesn't work with kids. Okay,
Right.
That's fine for adults. Everybody can just do what they want. Just don't bother anybody else. But that's not how it works with kids. Kids need to be trained. They need to be conditioned. They need to be guided. Okay, and all these kind of things that just sticking a kid behind a screen, laptop, iPad, whatever, is just not going to work. And we know it's not going to work. We've seen the results are in. The science is settled. We need to do something else radically as a society. And Trump's not going to do it. We need somebody who is a visionary, who has a real strong and inspiring vision of a collective future that we can all work towards and make the necessary sacrifice, not of children, mind you, but the necessary sacrifices to make so we can achieve this together, so we can have a world that we want to live in. It's like there's no shortage of anything. There's enough of everything for everybody in this world. I really honestly believe that. It's just a question of how do we manage it? How do we distribute it? How do we and I'm not trying to go all Marxist or anything on you guys. I'm just saying,
distribute.
I'm just telling you, it's just like we need to just change our perspective because we're failing our children by the millions.
Hey,
Okay.
Chris, are you familiar with Krishnamurti's education and the significance of life?
Yes.
You know, and Sri Aurobindo as well. Like, these people built schools, and their whole, like, their perspective on all of this is very resonant with all the things that you're talking about. But I'm also reminded that Krishnamurti, very shortly before he died, he tripped a bunch of people out because he went off about the computer and the future of the internet before anyone else was talking like he was talking about it. And he told this large group of people, he was like, you know, you're going to largely use this for sex and pleasure in one form or another. And he was like, you know, you think that this is all going to be about this, but he's like, he understood the way that people were, the way that people's leanings, like the gravity of it,
the
and
nature of humanity.
Well, we have examples of it. We have examples of
it.
You know, look at the printing press. Look at movies. Look at television. Look at radio.
Right.
You know,
right.
All these communication technologies always get used for pornography, basically. I mean,
right, but the printing press was originally all religious at first. So, like, we prioritized what we used the printing press for. So we even went through, like, more occult, like, esoteric stuff after actually, you know, after we're going to print the Bible.
There was porn in the Bible.
Sure. But, like, you're right. But
the Song of Solomon is basically porn.
It speaks to sublimation, because when we had the print, we went to the mystical initially before just about anything else, and then eventually when we introduced photography and film, it was like immediately like with sex, like we're like, oh, we can film each other doing whatever, you know. It's like it speaks to the principle of sublimation, the direction that we go. And it's also, this is all so relatable to Marshall McLuhan's arguments about like look at what's just happening, like right now, like we're talking about the election. What does it show us? Like, it shows us that the spectacle, that like people who are still looking to television to be the thing that it's been for them, they're like, you know, they're like the mouse at the feeder trying to get a pellet or whatever, and they're like, give me more of that. And they're so caught up in the spectacle of it, they don't realize, a lot of people, especially a lot of older people, don't realize that in the midst of this thing that they're so fascinated by in the display, that there's something else, like another extension of that media that's taking over. And like the malleability that social media allows us when it comes to relating to, you know, what this content, like, it used to be just we're being entertained, or we're spectators looking at the television. We can't interact with the television, yet the internet allows us to interact, and that's the next phase. And so, like, people are still looking to the previous medium as though it holds the significance that it no longer really holds, because you can dissect it in a way that you didn't used to be able to with a platform. So, like, you know, it speaks to this thing that Warhol talked about too, about in the future you're going to have a celebrity dies every 15 minutes or whatever. It's not just every dog has his day, you're going to have 15 minutes of fame. It's also that you're going to, like, there's going to be more and more and more celebrities to the point that, like, everybody treats themselves that they're a celebrity, you know, like, that seems to be happening. Like, people, like when the grumpy cat died, like the meme cat, it was like people were like crying about that. Like, what the hell is going on? Like, sorry.
Well, but I mean, here's the thing. You know, we're talking about how, oh, this is so clearly headed towards an apocalyptic, eschatological end of the world or civilization or what humanity as we know it.
Well,
right?
The potential is there. I'm not saying that's inevitable.
Cool. Yeah, you're not, because you're a nice guy. But the Illuminati or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Because, like, a lot of people are really excited about the end of the world, are they not? There's like a group of elite that seem to be really hoping for this end of time, end of reality.
They're pushing for it now in Europe.
And Mike Pence, yeah.
I think it's part narcissism too, though, to be like, I was the last person that got to go to that party. Like, no one got to go to that after hours.
Yeah. Where that's what this
or
is.
If no one can go.
Maybe this is the end. They were just celebrating this idea that they could. I mean, they're making fun of Left Behind, but at the same time, there was a certain kind of narcissism in that, of like, you know, even though it's making fun of themselves too, I guess. So maybe that's okay.
But I just mean that, you know, Chris is saying this from a clearly, like, you don't want humanity to end. You kind of like humanity. There's some people that seem to be aiming towards ending humanity with and time itself, with the hope of this anti-life solid state intelligence. Doesn't
Well,
that seems like there's a war?
I feel like I have skin in the game because I not only have kids, but I have grandkids. So
There you go.
my genes are already projected into the future, so to speak, my lineage. So I feel like I have some sort of investment in making sure that my progeny thrive and survive in the coming days.
Totally.
I don't think these problems are unfixable at all. I'm actually, if we just can develop the mental clarity and will to put aside all this nonsense that we're constantly bickering each other, it's just masturbation, really. I think that we can very easily overcome. I mean, I'm a big booster of humanity. I believe in our potential. I think that our tools are very helpful if we don't allow them to subsume us. But it's going to take a massive attitude change that I think is really at the core of our survival, quite frankly.
What do you think
to look at the world differently?
What is the deep state? What do you think?
Well, to me, it's the permanent bureaucracy that is more concerned with their kickbacks and their payoffs than they are with the world at large.
Right, exactly. So I would argue, just to add to that, that like the deep state, as far as I can tell, is just that rotating door between corporations and the regulatory agencies that are supposed to regulate those very corporations. And when that, if suppose somebody was to come with a cohesive plan for what to do about that, how would the media, who's sponsored by those very corporations, how would they respond to them, and how would the public mindset react? Like, it seems pretty predictable, right? So how would you, if people are looking to the media to provide their information and then they're so taken over, like, talk about the Kleepo, like that feels like such a direct expression. It's like, I don't know if you've ever taken ayahuasca, but my experience with ayahuasca was like, you pick up a stone and there's all these like worms or centipedes or snakes or something underneath, and they all kind of like are like panicking because they're like exposed, and then they're trying to dig in deeper to get away. Like, I see that happening right now. Like, it looks like that to me. Like, it's like something's being exposed and then they're going to go into a frenzy, and then people are going to follow suit, reacting to whatever it is that they're being told, but at the same time, at least light is being shown. So like, to me, that's all the deep state seems to be, is the corporate influence, not real control. Like, that's where conspiracy theorists at large tend to lose me, even though I myself am a conspiracy theorist. It's this idea of total control. And I think people look for security in that the same way that they look for security in the antithesis of that. So like, and the influence, like, I see conspiracy theory research as like ultimately a very positive thing, because when I go deep enough into any particular conspiracy, say it's JFK or 9/11, I see points where they're just barely getting by it by the skin of their teeth, as far as the quote unquote elites go. Like, they're not real, like they're just barely holding on. And I'm like, what does it take for the whole fucking the Wizard of Oz ending, where the curtain is just pulled? Like, is that where we're headed? Like, it seems like that's inevitable. That's why I end up.
Didn't we see that with Biden?
Sure. Yeah. Didn't we just see that happen every time they lie more and more and more? And then it's like more and more people realize.
Seen him. That's the best Biden I've ever seen.
Yeah.
2 weeks later,
sharp as a tic tac. Yeah.
Well, there were other Bidens. There was clearly no, it's true. There was clearly somebody wearing a mask. I think one of the Bidens did the State of the Union address, because I was looking at the photos and it's clearly a mask. I mean,
you know what it looks like to me, though? It just looks like he's getting plastic surgery. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, but plastic surgery doesn't make your eyelashes vanish. You know what I mean?
Vanish, yeah.
And it's like, it clearly looked plasticine. It wasn't even a good mask. I mean, we've seen these CIA masks.
Maybe.
But no, but like,
I mean, like Hillary Clinton had a body double. Yeah.
Didn't Saddam Hussein have like 10? So yeah.
But David, I mean, you talk, what they call it, institutional capture is the phrase they use.
The corporate capture, institutional capture. Yeah.
I mean, what if you really want to sort of cast your net a little wider? I mean, really, the deep state is this, like you said, that revolving door between these bureaucracies and these corporations, but also all these like strange councils, Council on Foreign Relations,
sure,
Atlantic Council. I mean, it's kind of like everybody's like, well, who's been running the country since Biden's clearly not lucid? And
I think it's mainly corporations are literally running the country.
It's these councils.
Sure.
It's all and it's an institutional architecture that basically runs this country.
You know that was actually what the Green New Deal was. People use that term, the Green New Deal, all over the place. It was a Google Doc. I think it's like 3 or 4 pages, if that. And basically in the actual Green New Deal of what the proposal was, you can find it. It's a little tricky to find. Everyone repeated it over and over again. Green New Deal, Green New Deal. I look into it. It was, I think, 12 people, maybe more. Maybe I'm thinking that for symbolic reasons, but it was a small group of people, unelected. No one would vote for them, but they would have so much power and influence over our policy and the lives of the population. It was the most like insanely like arrogant thing I could think of. And I was like, this is their environmentalism that they were actually pitching. And it was the Green New Deal is actually kind of terrifying. It's too much power given to people who nobody asked for. Like they just get appointed. They like this appointment thing. Like they tried to do that with Kamala. If I have one complaint about Kamala, it's nothing to do with her fucking personality or a lot of the things that people were speaking to, whatever. It's just that idea that they were undercutting democracy with clear choice. So the DNC super PAC that was like, says on their website, it's only like 3 sentences on their whole website, says what their ambition was to get rid of third parties altogether. And so, like, to me, that feels like a Philip K. Dick dystopian vision. It's just to have
binary instead of analog.
Yeah. And it was just like they directly say we are looking to end that. And they have tried to do that. It's the third election in a row that we didn't get to vote for, that I didn't get to vote for the candidates who I thought had the best shot, including Bernie Sanders, who was a sheepdog for the DNC, and Kennedy. And so it's like the endless lawsuits that they were going against and the amount of money and everything behind that to get rid of third parties. I see that as the biggest threat to democracy. And like that gets really freaking crazy and deep because you're like, people are looking to like.
But do you want a democracy for the same people that are using iPads all their lives? Like this next generation of people probably aren't built for a democracy.
Right, but is the other option better? So we're weighing options, right? We're always talking about the lesser of the evils with every election, more and more. That's all it seems to come down to. So that would be another example of that. You're like, and these things are open to interpretation, right? So you're like, well, what is it?
That's why it's why I think SSI and Echo are so freaking relatable. As a not just a metaphor for, but like a benchmark, because you have this sort of insectoid hive mind that is the solid state intelligence's Vortex Queen. And if that's not a great explanation for all of these kids being trained to react, I don't know what you said earlier, Bill, you talked about how they're drawn to it, right? It's not averse to it, they're drawn to it. And I think that's kind of because children are looking. Remember when the woke ideology was having critical there's criticism of the woke ideology saying that, hey, children like having black and white, true or false, this is good, this is bad, as their first imprint. They don't really like the convoluted, nuanced stuff. That's what we get when we're in college. You know, that's when we decide to look at things a different way or whatever. But at first, it's like Paw Patrol. And if you take that away from them, then they're going to look for it in sort of nature itself. And that might lead to this sort of hive mind. Hive mind really sticks out as the answer to me. Like the difference between the playful, questioning, thoughtful human and just sort of this go with and submit to the state sort of ideology that's emerging. I think that's what's going to happen with these kids.
Right.
Well, I just want to back it up because we've seen, I don't know what the exact statistics are, but there's something like 9 or 10 million men, young men particularly, who've just completely dropped out of the workforce. You know, this is something that a lot of people are worried about.
Yeah.
Now, the issue is that, you know, if we've had that based on these earlier educational standards, what is going to be happening with these new generations with, again, next to no skills, practical life skills or academic skills? You cannot run an advanced technological society with tens of millions of people who are unemployable. Okay.
Right. So you see the importance of trade schools. Are you sending your children to trade schools? Is that?
Well, my children are all adults.
Right.
My children are
Did
all,
they go to trade schools?
They've all graduated from college. You know, well, you know, my son,
liberal arts degrees, probably not.
my daughter, my daughter has a degree in psychology, and my son has his MBA. So
good job.
They're not. Yeah, I listen. I was as an artist. You know, I worked for Marvel for 25 years. I learned my lesson. I don't want any of my offspring whether it's this generation or the next to go into the arts, particularly nowadays with AI.
Right.
But no, I mean, we really, and I think one thing that we can do, and I know this sounds like a little silly to some people, but we can just start to imagine and talk about like a different future, and maybe like a tulpa, somebody will rise up out of these yearnings, so to speak, and be able to take this new world on that needs repairing, that needs remediation. That's my hope. You know, we have no power. We have no institutional power. We have no economic power. We have no military power. We have no political power, and that's 99% of the country. But we do have, you know, imaginal power. We do have the power to communicate with each other, and to say, well, listen, I'd like to sort of imagine something new. You know, something that doesn't draw on industrial age political philosophies like Marxism or fascism or something that's new, something that's different, something that applies itself to the realities that we're in now. I mean, that's something we can do. We can start to have these conversations.
Isn't that what John F. Kennedy was doing in the last year of his presidency?
Well, look what happened to him.
Well, exactly. Right. And I don't really think
but that was his power,
today's uneducated masses in the tactility of history, like the story of Bobby Kennedy Jr. is so Hollywood, so over the top Hollywood, and the fact that it couldn't be celebrated and couldn't be understood and communicated, to where if I tell a 16-year-old kid, do you know who this guy RFK Jr. is? They're like, oh, he's the crazy conspiracy theorist. And you go, well, did you know that his uncle was killed when he was 9 years old? And then his father got to the same position of power and was killed when he was 15 years old. And then he lost his mind in drugs and alcohol and sex, and then came to a realization and then changed his pathway and wanted to run as a Democrat, but they wouldn't let him run as a Democrat. And he made the decision to switch sides, and that side won. And we're on the precipice of finding out who killed his uncle and his father.
Yeah.
Like, this is Marvel shit.
Yeah,
literally.
It's like modern mythology, like playing out in time, and it's happening like below the surface almost, but it's right there in plain sight at the same time, because the narrative is for so many people's perspective takes the forefront. Like the media narrative of it has more weight.
Well, look at
the freaking story itself, the thing itself, you know,
and look at the flip, the radical flip of the diseased medium. You had Kennedy at the end saying, do not vote for me.
Yeah, that's it right there.
You have the son of the guy who, and he's saying the best thing you can do is not vote for me. It's like so right. PKD. It's so twisted because it's filtered through this medium that's been so corrupted that doesn't know what's here or there. And now that we're on the other side of this, I think people will start to understand that, like, remember that interview with Tucker and Putin? And Putin was like, you really want to talk? All right, we need to go back 600 years. And the average American is like, that's insane. What? He's going to try to connect something 600 years ago with this moment? And they think that's insanity. They think it's insanity to try to connect something from 1963.
Well, I mean, I was thinking, because what you just said earlier, like, don't vote for me. This isn't quite the same, but thinking about where we're at today, like, would you say an obvious trope in children and young adolescents today is I don't care, right? Like, an apathy. You think apathy is a big one? I don't care.
I think that's a common reaction to not getting out of your comfort zone for teenagers. They find a place where they're safe, and to not care just means you can kind of stay put. I think we were so conditioned to what adolescence was going to be from TV and movies. Mm-hmm. We had the whole stage play in front of us. We kind of knew where we were going to fit in as a character.
I was really confused why I didn't look 35 until,
right? Like Grease, the movie.
Way after junior high.
Right. Yeah. The male and female is antithesis, though. You notice that? How so much of the conditioning, I should say programming, that goes into, for girls, it's all about marriage, right?
Yeah.
It's all like, that's the fairy tale. And then for men, it's largely about war, which is going off to fight, and potentially like they're complete, like there's no reconciling that. You notice that? Like it's like the programming for war for the boys, the programming for marriage for the girls, and then trying to have that meet somehow. It's like square peg round hole, you know?
I think the unintended consequence of our technology was in the sense that a figure like Christ was supposed to have transcended the earthly boundaries and been reborn into sort of a genderless, right? Because he always talked of himself as both male and female, right? That this Christ consciousness,
male and female created,
sort of transcends the definitions of your earthly incarnation, right? But that this fast, uninterrupted stream of consciousness has birthed some sort of like junior Christ consciousness that's manifesting in the trans kind of identity.
Right, but in the name of transcendence, they're enforcing the binary that much further, and that's the paradox of the trans initiative.
They're confusing the shockwave of Christ consciousness is something physical, not metaphysical, because they have no metaphysical place to put it.
And it's perhaps
it's reductive.
The ideology of binary.
It's reductive. Yeah,
it is because when you see all this talk about androgyny and so on and so forth, and all this ancient spiritual literature, it's a consciousness thing. It's not about like, you know, I mean, of course there were eunuchs and there were trans and cross dressers, you know, but that was largely a pagan phenomenon. You know, but also in Hinduism and so on and so forth.
I wonder why no one said that gender doesn't have to be binary; it could be analog. You know, I think that's kind of the thing we've taught ourselves.
Well, this is the thing, though, is that the whole thing about the non-binary is treated as though I'm something special because I identify as non-binary. Whereas, like, if you're looking at it from like a Vedantic place, you'd just be like, aren't we all non-binary? So where's the specialness? Where does the, you know, like...
Well, let's be frank. Let's be frank, though. I mean, this whole entire movement is driven by the medical and pharmaceutical industry.
Thank you.
Yeah. Lifelong clients.
Right.
Period.
Totally.
All the rest of it goes to serve that agenda. And I'm going to offend people. I don't care. It's all concocted, and it was all concocted and created to generate capital for very large corporations.
I would caveat that by like saying the Weimar Institute would be saying, "What about us?" Right? There's definitely some eugenics and experimentation.
Right, but then wouldn't the Bernays thing be like, we're utilizing Freudian psychology to sell these products, or not just products, but like literal, like basically buying people's minds. Like, how much does it cost to buy your position? You know what I mean? Like,
I think it's the same thing. I think it's the same thing as selling video game graphics cards. Right? Like, they need to accelerate the military industrial complex, whether or not you like Tony Hawk. So they get you to buy video games, and that will eventually accelerate. And right, and this is kind of what Bill was saying earlier about the I don't care thing, which relates very much to where I was trying to go originally with it, because I don't care, right? I remember I saw this earlier, and I've seen a lot of kids acting this way. Well, I saw a kid wearing a shirt like this, and I was like, how did you get away with that? Oh, I know, because you don't know that was actually Mussolini's quote. "Mi ne frego" was the fascist slogan. This was his slogan. I don't care. That's what they had. Italian kids walking around with little flags that said, "I don't care." Right. Mm-hmm. And so to me, it seems related that we're, like you're talking about, are we headed back into things instead of into the future? Are we just this is the best way to recycle syndicated programming? They get kids into the same mode of thinking that made them buy stuff in the first place that they wanted to sell. It's like you're at a restaurant and they're trying to sell you the special because the fish is going to go bad. That's what it
right, but they
like.
don't want to do focus groups to figure out what people secretly want. Like, that's the difference between just what Bernays was doing, which we would call nefarious in certain ways, but it's not as nefarious as that programming that gets people to think that they want things that they don't actually need or didn't want to begin with until they were manipulated into thinking that they needed them. So like, they used to be like, well, what is it that people really want and need? We got to figure this out so we can sell it to them, and we'll make it last as long as possible, whatever products it is that we build, so that that'll be part of the appeal. And they were like, how do we manipulate people to embrace wanting products that they know will not last, but they need them anyway?
Hey.
You know, it's like, yeah. What? Oh, okay. Yeah, no, somebody's
breaking the fourth wall here.
No.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But yeah, you see that big distinction, and it corresponds to a certain shift that occurred, like just looking at like I think it was the 70s and the 80s where that happened, and you can also see like war became that too. Like there was like this like where it just became nothing but strictly about profit. Like there's no more anybody trying to do something for these intentional righteous reasons. Like don't a lot of people still argue today that World War II is actually like that was something that was a just war to get involved in, and it's like everybody knows that Vietnam was just for profit. Like it was a proxy war with Russia.
You know what else it is though. I think that Vietnam was about dealing with surplus population of young men.
Totally. Yeah.
Who, because the baby boom was so large, and
right.
You had a very large surplus population of young men. What do we have in the 50s? We had juvenile delinquency, and in the early 60s. I think that war is more of a society management program than people give it credit for, because when you look at particularly the major wars of this century, things change so radically, and it's a lot of technologies and concepts and so on and so forth that were already in the planning stages. And the war, oh gosh, how lucky we are! We have this war that we can start to institute, industrialization on a mass scale, and mass vaccination, and industrialized public schooling, and all these kind of things. Oh, how convenient that this war just sort of popped up and gave us this opportunity to do so. So
right.
I mean that we're getting into the realms of conspiracy, but the one thing that I would bring up that I had read some time ago is that there was actually literature on this, that the Crusades were also about dealing with surplus populations of violent young men that needed to be given an outlet for their violence.
Right.
I would argue that Vietnam was about that, but I would also argue that the Gulf War was about that too.
Right, but there's an issue there though, because when you look at World War I, there's a lot of people who we've talked about this before, but who wouldn't fire upon the projected enemy, and they would shoot away, they would shoot over their heads. They didn't want to actually do it, so they had to figure out. You see this with the Marine Corps, and it's really like expressed well in Full Metal Jacket, among other places, where the programming had a lot to do with sublimation. So they get people to equate killing with getting laid. So you want all that young person energy that would be going into getting laid in the rye field to go out into, to get a kill is the equivalent of getting laid. So like to impress that upon them. Also, I've been told this by a couple Marines who are my ex-girlfriend's sisters had married, who were both in Iraq, and they told me that the reason why they didn't continue with the military was because it was one thing to accept when your sergeant is telling you that your purpose on planet Earth is to kill above all else. It's another thing to get to the place where now it's your job to tell other people that their purpose on Earth is to kill. So like they could handle being told by a superior that this is your purpose. They couldn't bring themselves to be in the role of telling others that this is your purpose. So it's like, that's really the test of if you're going to make it in that line of military, is how much you're willing to compromise that. Like we're talking about culture war stuff. If I was to look at like what makes for a high ESG score, environmental social governance, it's really just about complicity. I don't even think they really care about these culture war issues. I think it's just about, will they be compliant so that when the thing comes along, that's the new never waste a crisis issue, will they comply with whatever it is that they're being told? And will they go with the program? And then also, if there's economic collapse, who's going to have some safety net with the banks? Is like, why would Budweiser do what they did and like take on such a loss, knowing that that's going to happen, if there wasn't some other ambition in mind? And I would say it's ESG scores. Why is it that Tesla has a significantly lower ESG score than Bud Light now? Like, that's the electric car company. Aren't they supposed to be more environmental? Like, than the.
Don't put your money into
Frontier.
Jaguar. Please don't do it. Yeah.
There you go. But yeah, you see what I'm getting at there.
We're describing just like a Fabian approach, like you're thinking in terms of generations as opposed to terms of decades or further than that. And I really like whenever you bring up the whole Full Metal Jacket as like sexualizing war to like satiate these kids. And what Chris was saying before too, of like get them away from the video games into the real world.
Yeah.
The first thing I thought of was like, we need kids to actually be acting out Catcher in the Rye, but really what they're doing is they're ordering hot coffee in Grand Theft Auto, and they're almost equating that. And in that context of Grand Theft Auto, that's like also just in the whole world of just pure violence, right? Like you're still redirecting it in that exact same way.
Totally. What a trip. Yeah.
Well, as a Gen Xer, so I read this statistic, and I'm not sure if it's accurate, but it's something like 2/3 of young men under 30 aren't having sex, don't have sexual partners.
That's true.
Losers.
Yeah.
Well,
read Wilhelm Reich. That's a bad sign. Look at the mass psychology of fascism and consider that.
So when I was a kid, we'd just like go out and like you just walk around and like meet some girls and make out with them and feel them up or whatever, and then you're like, oh, thank you, and then never see them again. I mean, it was just like
highly problematic.
There was nothing else to do, I mean, but it's people just took it for granted, just that's what we did.
Yeah, but no one had cell phones to film you, take pictures of you.
Well, exactly. This is why I'm saying, if we really want to ensure our future collectively and socially and civilizationally, we're going to have to really rethink how we allow young people to use technology, period. And I that goes against all of our precepts and all of our ideals, but we're going to have no choice. And the thing is too, is like, look at how weird people are getting, particularly young people, with like all this stuff. People blame like social media contagion, right? But I think it's because they're not having sex and they just go sideways, and it's like, young people should be having sexual experiences with each other. It's healthy and it's normal. And every generation prior
that's
to
what the mystery schools, all the mystery schools were really kind of, in a weird way, it's about how important sex is, and we've made it into this sort of thing that was forbidden unless you did it through the initiated rite, because all of a sudden it's no longer a sin if it's done in this correct way, but it's
a tool of social control. I mean, controlling young people's sexuality is always what every society. Oh, where'd my camera go? Was what every society needs to do. Okay, but we can't have this situation go on. We can't have people going on these dating sites like they're shopping on Amazon. Okay, you know what I mean? We can't.
Stop.
We can't reduce people to products. Everything we need a vast rethink, because all this stuff happened by accident. All this technology was new, and we're all busy running around like by myself as a parent and so on. It caught everybody by surprise, but now we know, and now we know the fruits of it, and we need to change radically, or we're doomed.
We're so close to the end of this episode and the end of time and space and history itself, but I wanted to maybe ask about CERN. Is that crazy? I know we've been talking about real things for a second, but CERN's interesting in that reality hacking sense. I don't know, Celion, Jake Coates, he's talked a bit about the idea of reality hacking. Do you guys have thoughts on CERN? Maybe Bill, do you believe in anything about CERN being real?
Well, CERN, the atom smasher, right? Where we
do you think we're reality hacking? Yeah. Do you think we're reality hacking with that? Is that anything real, or is that just online hippie talk?
I don't think that affects us as much as media does. Again, when you change the sense ratios of the brain, and that happens through epigenetic generational advances, you're a different human being, right? Living in a world that was designed by a different human being. You're not at home anymore. You're outcast, right? This is what I was talking about this exodus, right? The 20th century, like the peak 20th century, I think is best displayed in White Noise by DeLillo, right?
Oh.
That family's little world that they exist in, right? And everything inside the house is fine, right? The wife and the husband get it on, the kids are funny, they have the house, but everything outside the house is going to absolute shit and chaos, right? Inside the little nuclear family, everything's fine, but yet on the horizon, the toxic chemical disaster or whatever it is.
It's true that there was extras in that film that actually experienced that shortly after the movie came out in real life in Palestine. Was it Palestine?
East Palestine is how it's pronounced.
Palestine, yeah.
Yeah, same state.
Well, that's a weird one. Is that a psyop thing? Like, what the hell? And then I look into that director and his philosophy and stuff, which is largely to do with like decay. He talks a lot about 9/11 and like how there's like beauty in knowing that something has only such a shelf life, and that like in things falling apart, like that they don't last forever. That's where the beauty exists and all this kind of weird stuff. But yeah.
But when you think of white noise, I think of the static of a television that has gone off signal.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Carol
so
Ann.
peak 20th century was like the world is on, the world is off. You can go to bed now. The world is all going to sleep too. Everything's going to be safe, right? You'll wake up in the morning. That white noise will turn to a clear picture and we'll go back into the world, right? There was this buffering or this compartmentalization of the world. We don't have that anymore, right? Once we got 24/7, 365 news, it was over, right? The anxiety overdrive occurred. Our sense ratios went out of whack. And we're just not living in the world that our society is built on. We are aliens in our own environment. And it's going to take a generation to fix this, but we're not going to understand what that next world is. And I don't think the solution is going backwards necessarily. But then again, I have a lot of hope that a new generation will develop new leaders and they will see a vision that we can't see because they're different from us.
That's what
Just
scares me.
Genetically,
How different they are. So that's the thing that scares me, because like they could be so different that could describe that antithesis of us from that other side of reality that we're talking about, and yet still be something that is part of us, right? And I think that might be where we're at. We're at a point where we have a major fork in the road, forward and backward maybe, but also in and out, like who we are, what we become, what humanity is. And we have been on a path. We have seen what happens. I like humanity. I like the idea of creative, passionate, poetic, playful, mammalian human beings. I think they're interesting. I'd like to see that more. And I'm very concerned that that's something that's being...
concerned.
Oof. Thanks, girl. That was good. Thank you.
I also like how you talk
maybe...
about humans in third person. You guys are okay.
Oh, boy.
Well, again,
right.
I would go back to the metaphor of like we're an ecosystem that something alien entered into, and it's created all this upset and stress and dislocation and so on. But I personally believe that we will overcome that. But I think that we, on the other side of this, I think our brains will be different. The way we perceive the world will be different. The way we separate the real from the imaginal will be different. The conscious from the unconscious will be different. This is something that I think a lot that, we need to start to bring more of this, I don't want to say unconscious, subconscious. I mean, these terms are all very loaded, but we need to bring more of what we have stored, in our heads and our brains into our daily lives, and sort of counteract the programming that comes from, factory work, the educational system, which is just, as people say, was created to condition people for factory work and shifts and so on and so forth, and the monotony of that. We need to get past that, but we need inspiration. We need vision. Without vision, the people perish. We need vision, and I think the vision is going to be something that's more than just like rhetoric or kind words. It's going to need to be something that's practical and that's demonstrable and is tangible. Okay. What shape and form that is going to take, I don't know. but that is the only way that we're going to be able to integrate all this into our lives. I am an AI skeptic, as I've said many a times. I think that I think we've almost reached sort of the frontiers of the possibilities of AI. I don't believe all these scare stories about Skynet and everything like that. All this robotic stuff is vastly oversold, and all these kind of AI scare stories are part of the sales pitch. So, but I think it also offers us opportunities, if we can assimilate it. Okay, we need to be like the reverse Borg, like the
Ooh.
biological Borg. We are taking the invasion, let's just say this digital invasion, this binary invasion of solid state intelligence, getting back to the premise of all this, and we need to sort of, in the same way that scar tissue forms over a wound or something, or the way the earth repairs itself, after a radioactive leak or some sort of trauma, or volcano, forest fire. I mean, the earth is, the ecosystem, the planet, whatever you choose to call it, is very adept at repairing itself and sort of integrating this outside destructive influence into the whole program. And I think that's what we really need to start thinking about. And I don't know what form it's going to take, but we are at the end of so many cycles right now. I mean, so many cycles that we were so conditioned to accept as eternal and endless are all ending, all at the same time. There's so many different things that are just all of a sudden just falling apart. Media is falling apart, Hollywood's falling apart. I mean, even big tech is starting to wobble. I mean, so many of the things that we took for granted, the educational system, all these things are at the end of their natural lifespan and their chain of possibilities. And we have to imagine new possibilities. We have to have a new vision and a new, almost like a new imagination. We have to start to imagine things differently. We have to start to incorporate all this data in different ways than we have been, because the way we have been dealing with it is to just basically numb ourselves to it. And that is not going to fly. And when people talk about, the iPad kids and all this kind of stuff, I'm like, yeah, these kids are numbed. You know what I mean? They've been overstimulated, and those neural pathways are all been numbed, and we have to get past that numbing effect. How is that going to happen? I don't know. But like I said, we're at the end of the cycle here. And it's something that I think about, like, what am I going to do for my work? How am I going to move forward with the work I do? How am I going to stay relevant in this new world? And these are things that I think we all need to think about, all of us, particularly in this community, because we were so conditioned to respond, particularly to the world post 9/11. Well, that world is ending now. And a new system, a new world is coming in, a new consciousness is coming in. How do we respond to that? How do we take advantage of that? How do we grow within that? And how do we together, collectively, start to help incorporate that on a larger scale? Because listen, all the major changes in the world always start with like a very small group of people who have a vision and who are dedicated to bringing that about. I mean, that's always the way it is. It's always the early adapters, the movers and the shakers, the innovators, and so on and so forth. And we need to decide, do we want to be that, or we just want to sort of just sit back and let the show go on to its inevitable conclusion? And I would say, I don't think we have that option anymore. We don't have that option. We need to be able to, particularly us, we're all like processing all this media, all this information, synchronicity, symbolism, ritual, all these kind of things. I mean, it's like, it's almost like we have a responsibility. Okay, we had all the fun doing all the sync work and all the videos and all the rest of it. Now we have to get to work, because I think that our way of looking at the world is going to be helpful for getting past this collective impasse that we're all at, culturally, politically, economically, spiritually, socially, on and on and on. We're going to need to get together and decide how we're going to overcome this and work towards it, because there's no reason that we should not be living in a wonderful future, in a golden age future. You know, it's really down, to technology is always the mover and shaker of human happiness and comfort and plenty, really. But it can also destroy us. And how are we going to move past that? And it's going to take, like, looking at this new reality very clearly and dispassionately, and being able to say to people, to start a conversation, no matter how small it might be, no matter how localized it might be, start a conversation with people. It's like, I think we can do something else. I think we can move somewhere else. We can move towards a different future that doesn't rely on the past. We can't go back to these systems that were all created to deal with the industrial age. We're just not there anymore. We're at the post-industrial age, and now we're at the post-industrial age. What I mean? We're at the re-industrial age, but it's going to be completely different because so much of the reindustrialization that we're seeing happening now is reliant on automation. How do we deal with that? You know what I mean? So it's like it's almost like we've had a lot of fun, playing with all these kind of mimetic toys, so to speak. But I think it's going to be contingent on people like us and the people who are interested in our work to start to say this needs to move forward because we're at the end of the road.
Bill made an interesting point before this call where he was saying that, if you look at what the Sync community was with our blogs and the kind of stuff that we were doing and what you continue to do with the Secret Sun, when you look at Twitter and large swaths of what's become of Twitter is very much like a magnification of the kind of stuff that we were doing. So when it comes to, because it's not just Sync, it's that distinction that we tended to make, a lot of us tended to make between well, is this a synchronicity as a cosmic or just a causal principle that exists, or is this contrived? And I think what we're being challenged with, what we're being presented with is more. I think people are underestimating how many people are reacting to what they perceive as contrived. So if you're running a campaign now that feels very scripted and contrived, you're going to have more and more people being like, wait a second, and they're not going to buy into it the same way that they traditionally have, which speaks to the medium shifting from television into this more interactive thing. So it's really interesting when you look at a lot of what's going on Twitter. It just reminds me of what the old Sync community was, just now it's more in the mainstream. It's it's in vogue now.
I think back to the height of the Secret Sun Facebook group, which to me was the best of the best. That just was everything. It hit at the right place at the right time with the right person. And for about 2 years, that group, you could come home to a 120 thread post, read it like a novel, and have something to interject, and it would go on. I mean, it was just stunning. It literally was the conversation, right? But I think what we're finding is that on Twitter, this is what I was going to say. At the peak of the Secret Sun group, I think 75 to 85% of the people in that group were lurkers, people who weren't posting. Right. Okay. So it might have said, I don't know how many thousands of people, but it might have been only about 75 people really fighting it out, duking it with 90% of the posts. Lurkers would sometimes come in
maybe
and
150, 200. Yeah.
So I think this election was decided by the lurkers on Twitter. I think that there was this huge mass of millions of people who didn't know what was going on, but they kept checking it. And when they went into that ballot box, they held their breath and they said, I think this is what it is. I think they're right.
That confessional moment, right? Where it's
so
there's no one here
know
to
how
tell you
large that mass was, but the only indicator was it was too big to rig. And I'm really not that political. But it was the most fascinating 9 months of politics in human history. It was so bizarre how much happened. 2 assassination attempts, a Kennedy switching parties. Whoa. I mean, HBO and Breaking Bad had nothing on that 9 months.
Well, the
But
one
I
thing,
think it was the lurkers who saw the few voices having the right conversations amidst the chaos, and that light was just bright enough to kind of carry us through. And yeah, per our conversation, I think the Secret Sun group was that microform of what we're seeing on X. And I think it's a good thing, personally.
yeah, I kind of missed that. You know, that was like you can only have that kind of intensity for a very short period of time. It doesn't sustain itself. And what it also does is that it attracts people who are not there to contribute to the conversation. They're there to hijack conversation. And unfortunately, that's what happened around the time, ironically, of the 2016 election. You know, much to my dismay. But one thing I just wanted to add. I know we're wrapping it up here, but the one thing that I am encouraged by with the election and with this new administration is that I'm just seeing a lot of young faces and new faces. You know, I'm so tired of seeing like these 67-year-old, 80-year-old hacks who've been kicking around Washington for decades, lining their pockets and screwing the public. I mean, I'm not saying that's not going to happen. Maybe that's inevitable.
Pelosi and McConnell at the same time. They're like the
yeah,
two.
exactly. I mean, it just drove me crazy. So the one thing that I am encouraged by, and maybe some of these people have children of their own, you know, younger people and so on. I mean, I'm not, you know, I haven't been really studying up on their biographies and so on. But that is the one thing that I'm encouraged by, is seeing young faces and new faces. Because last year? Yeah, last year we went down the shore. My family, we went on this vacation down the shore, and we're all sitting around, and somebody goes, you know, Dad, did you watch the Republican debate? And I was like, are you high? No, I didn't watch it. And then they go, well, who would you vote for? And I said, well, if I had to vote for any of them, I would vote for Vivek Ramaswamy.
Right.
And they said, well, why? And I said, because he's young and he's smart, and he's not a career politician. You know, that's what we need. We need people to come in with fresh ideas. And I'm not just saying politics. I'm
creativity.
everywhere.
Yeah, that's the problem. There's a lack of creativity, and people are reacting to it. And the people who don't care, like, you notice how the biggest critics tend to be the least creative people.
Yes.
And they'll criticize the most creative people. Like, what do you do with this? You know, it's like the guy with the belly sitting there watching football and saying, "What the frick is wrong with you?" And you're like, "Dude, what would you do? Like, what can you do? Like, you're out there on the field, how's it working out for you?"
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. So anyway, that's what I have to say.
Well,
I mean,
my internet's like ping is like broken really hard. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's all right. I was done. Anyway,
yeah. Do we want to do the plugs? Is that how this works, Andreas?
Let me try it. Let me quickly plug it up. I want to tell you guys to go to MK Ultrasound 723 on X. Go to the highlights page and watch The Substance with Katy Perry's album. Not just because Katy Perry loved the movie, not just because I love the movie, but because David put them together, and it's gonna freak you out. If you love David, you're gonna love that. Make sure you go to Paranoid American, because everything's on sale. Go to paranoidamerican.com. It's got 12 off of 15, 10 instead of 13. You're going to love getting the Bohemian Grove playset, and he has a whole bunch of new Never a Straight Answer comic books that are out right now if you want to go down to the Kickstarter, and Why the Titanic Sank. And I think the big one is the Satanic Panic one, although the Bavarian Illuminati comic is like crushing it right now.
That's
so if
the
you
one
want to buy some
back
amazing
right now
conspiracy comic books.
At IlluminatiComic.com,
Yeah,
and we're 2
there you
weeks
go.
into the 4-week campaign.
See,
So
14
this is
days.
the one to back.
Nice.
Yeah, and I mean, you're well beyond the goal. It's like you could buy a freaking car in Europe right now. But go ahead, everybody. Make sure that you don't miss out on these Illuminati comics, because there's also like special packages as well. This is your freaking chance. And then make sure that you thank yourself for making this possible. I'm really excited that we hit 800 concurrent viewers on this stream. I really appreciate that. If you like Chris as much as I do, then you'll love Secret Sun Blogspot. It's one of my favorite pages. He also has a Facebook group like we were talking about. I think it's still up, even though they just took down mine. Chris, thank you for the advice on talking to Facebook about that. I'm going to try to get my group back from the Gestapo. Yeah. Anyone have any more closing words before I say goodbye?
I want to just say, Chris, it's always a pleasure. I love having you on here. You're a great conversationalist, and I appreciate the congruency as well as the debate. Like, it's all just really rich and enjoyable. So thank you.
I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. It's been we've known each other a long time now. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were on the kitchen sink group too, weren't you? Back in the day.
Oh yeah, no, I've been close with the whole thing for a long time. I mean, it was Bill. We had you as our guest, I think back in, what was that, 2011 or something, maybe 12, like when we did Always Record. Yeah, so yeah, it's been a while. So yeah.
And Bill's total OG Secret Son. OG,
yeah.
original gangster, old school.
Yeah.
Kicking
Yeah, it's amazing to see how over 15 years the things we agree on, the things we disagree on waver, but at the end in the conversation it feels like the center point is still there, and so I'm here for it. It was awesome.
Yeah. So you just give you a little bit of context really quickly. Like, Bill reached out to me and Alan way back when with the idea to do Always Record. And I was just like, I have one prerequisite. I don't want to start out with a conclusion and spend the whole show trying to back up that conclusion. I would rather just go through data and to the point where it can kind of just speak for itself. And that was kind of what we set the intention of the show as. And so now, like, that has been like a staple, even the way that I relate to this. Like, I don't like that thing where we have an argument where we believe something so strongly and we got to prove it. Like, that's Alex Jones. He can do that. It's cool for other people to do that. That's not my style. But Bill, at one point, like, what was this, 2 years ago or something, he reaches out to me and he's like, I need to get the hell out of Dodge. He was living in Chicago. Alan was in New York. He's in Virginia now or something. But yeah, Bill drove out here and he's been living at my house for the last couple of years. And so we have a sink house now. So it's all, you know, the way that things work is sometimes, you know, I like that. Was it Leary, or what am I thinking, where we like find the others? Like, what now? Find the others. Do you know who was that?
Turn in, tune on, drop out. What do we do next? Find the others.
Find the others.
Yeah,
wasn't McKenna Find the Others?
No, he just preached that a lot. He always said that was one of his favorites of Leary.
Yeah.
But I just want to shout out one last thing. When I was getting into the Secret Son, and there at that time it was just everything was boiling over, and I kept writing to Chris. At one point, he just says, "You got to write your own stuff. You got to produce your own stuff. That's the next step." He goes, "I don't know what to tell you, man, but that is the next step." And he was 100% right. If you are out there blogging, keeping a public journal, if you are out there interviewing the voices that you need to talk to, then you are giving back and it's coming back to you. It just fuels the whole process. And if you don't jump into that with the abundance of opportunities we have now, you're just completely missing out. So again, just to that lurker comment, there's like 80% of the populations of these podcasts and blogs that continue to lurk. And if we could just have that flip over, where more and more people start to jump in and claiming their own voice and looking into their own things, I think it just makes the community and the conversation stronger. So I think as a professor of sync, that was the number one piece of advice that you gave me. And it's the hardest, right? Because you no longer are in your comfort zone. You now have to kind of own up to your mistakes, but you also get the celebration when you're correct. So in a career of great advice, that I think stuck out as the biggest one. So
that's the end of Pump Up the Volume, by the way. Keep the air alive. Yeah. All right.
We'll do this again soon. I love you all.